Hello and welcome to The Urbanist, Monocle's programme all about the built environment. I'm your host, Andrew Tuck. Coming up.
With these initiatives, it's like raising an awareness about the importance of quality on our lives and cities and built environment.
How can a municipal architect help to shape a city? On today's episode, we explore a variety of examples of municipal architects from the local all the way through to the national level. We speak with one of London's newest town architects, head to Czechia to explore the municipal architect role on a city scale, and chat with the firm charged with advising the Swedish government at a national level. That's all coming up over the next 30 minutes here on The Urbanist with me, Andrew Tuck. We start today in London, where recently the city's mayor has announced a 2-year pilot scheme to improve its streets and public spaces. The programme appoints 10 specialists to a selection of towns around the UK capital to support, guide and improve their urban environments. I was joined recently by one of these new appointments, Jazz Barler. The founder of Jazz Barler Works has been appointed as town architect for Ilford, Redbridge, and was given the responsibility of developing a holistic view of activity in and around the town centre and ensuring individual sites are viewed through the lens of overall placemaking objectives. I began by asking Jazz to describe the area in which he'll be working as part of this new programme.
Redbridge is a suburban borough to the east of London, so it's just on the border between London and Essex. So Essex is sort of much more suburban in its character. So we're not in sort of central London, we're much more towards the outskirts. That said, there's been a lot of investment into transport connectivity to that part of the world, notably through Crossrail, which is now known as the Elizabeth line. It means you can now get from Ilford to central London in around 20 minutes, which is quite incredible, really. And you can get from Ilford to Heathrow Airport in, I think, about 45 minutes. So given that level of investment into transport infrastructure, there's an obvious desire to create new homes that London desperately needs, and with it, new jobs. And part of my role is to make sure that we, as a collective, the borough, is applying sort of joined up thinking in the way different sites are coming together to make sure that we are getting the best of development coming forward and it's delivering for Ilford's residents.
Now tell me, so the boroughs of London, again, we're making it simple for listeners around the world, they all have their own authorities and they all have their own planning departments and they get to make many decisions at a local level. Of course, there are some decisions that get called into a higher planning authority or even up to kind of government level. But why does an authority like this need help from the mayor sitting in central London to dispatch, in a way, an architect to come help them? What's their need?
So the need varies really across. So London, I think, is made of 32 different authorities. The Greater London Authority, that's the mayor's office, sort of sits above that. And in London, we have the London Plan. So the mayor is quite active in setting planning controls, zoning regulations. I mean, we're not strictly zoned, but to use terminology that might be more familiar with some listeners. So the London mayor sets the kind of strategic objectives, and then individual local authorities within the GLA area, they bring forward what's called local plans. So that's their local response to how they're going to create new homes, how they're going to conserve certain areas, how they're going to protect the natural world, how they're going to kind of enhance things like biodiversity. The role of their local plan is to kind of meet all those strategic objectives. Now, the GLA are always looking to kind of support growth, and the mayor's office is very active in trying to support what he calls good growth, so making sure growth responds to local needs, helping to reduce inequality, provide opportunity for less advantaged parts of London, make sure we're bringing forward development with the sort of highest environmental credentials. So the mayor is very active in trying to look to support local authorities where possible. I think probably the level of planning capacity, design capacity varies across certain boroughs. So some boroughs benefit from a number of in-house architects and urban designers. Others' capacity is more limited. I think Redbridge is probably a little bit more limited, and in this instance my role is really to kind of support them, not so much in terms of scrutinising individual applications. Some local authorities, Redbridge included, are able to call on a panel of experts to help them with that through what we call design review. It's more to kind of help make sure that we've got the right strategies in place to make sure the growth coming forward, the new homes, the new jobs, are really the best they can be.
So give us an example. So you've now embedded yourself a little bit with the authority. You've got to know the team there. So what kinds of things have you been kind of saying, I could help you here, I've got a thought?
So I think there's a couple of things that I'm personally interested in doing. I think number one is making sure that we really are making the most of this transport investment that we've had come forward. So across the Elizabeth line in London, we've seen different development outcomes across different places. And I think I'm really keen to make sure Ilford is up there with sort of getting, the best results in terms of look at how transformative this infrastructure investment has been in terms of the new homes and jobs we're able to create. So I think that's number one. A second thing would be making sure that schemes at planning stage and then also when they're being delivered, they're really joined up. There are a huge number of development opportunities within the town centre, and we want to make sure that the person bringing forward development parcel A is talking to person bringing forward development parcel B, who's talking to the local authority about the new connections they're opening up to, green spaces. So things come forward in a cohesive manner, and they come forward in a manner that looks to kind of enhance the lives of existing communities as well as new residents coming in.
There are 10 of you who've been assigned these roles with different places across the city to try and work. And are you working as a team as well? Are you feeding into each other saying, okay, I'm beginning to see what we can do here?
Yeah, totally. I think I'm very keen that we check in with others who especially are in other contexts that relate to our context. And obviously, Crossrail has enabled amazing east-west connectivity across London. But there are a lot of similarities between what you have happening in suburban East London and what you have happening in suburban West London, for instance. So a colleague is the town architect for a place called Hayes, which is very close to Heathrow Airport. I'm very particular that we have conversations, not least because Hayes is where I grew up. And so, hopefully there's things I can learn from him and vice versa about our respective roles. But I think, yes, we're certainly going to have a number of comings together during the duration of the programme.
We're at a point where we have a national government that's very keen. They have this ambitious programme to build 1.5 million new houses, seemingly during their term, which I think everybody thinks is going to be kind of impossible to deliver. You have councils who have a huge pressure on them to deliver new homes. We have large numbers of people who are homeless, not all rough sleeping or without housing, but often sleeping on other people's couches, not in ideal situations. Do you feel you're on a bit of a complicated bucking horse here? Because it's like everybody's pulling in different directions. There's so much to be going on. I wonder how much time there is for the finessing of these ideas to think about inclusion and things when you do have just so many people who don't have a home.
No, it's a very good question. I would totally acknowledge and recognise the context you've just described. I think added to that, we've got a government who is very ambitious, but a lot of the signalling has been that they're very much relying on the private sector to hit those numbers. And we've got a private sector that's really struggling with inflation, with regulatory change, with, addressing things like having second fire stairs, looking at cladding remediation. So the industry I don't think it's any secret that it's really, really struggling. But I would argue that the idea of what the Mayor calls good growth and looking at inclusion and looking at getting these sites to speak to each other, promoting good design is not a kind of added expense. It's about kind of really optimizing and maximizing these sites. And in certain instances, it could mean enhancing the capacity rather than decreasing it. So I think a lot of things I'm keen to push is that inclusive, responsive design is not a kind of expensive add-on or something that requires bigger contributions to the public purse by way of what we call in an English planning context, Section 106 agreements. So the payment the developer makes to the local authority to contribute to social programs and things like that. I don't think it's a kind of add-on that makes things more expensive or less viable. It makes them more valuable, and I would argue a lot of the times it would mean more and perhaps better, well, certainly better quality development coming forward.
But just on that, we look at how all of our cities are changing, and there isn't the money as yet for large-scale public housing being built by local authorities because they just don't have the resources to. They are dependent on working with the private sector. So I presume that your relationship also has to be with those developers who come forward who do want to develop these pieces of land and say, look, hold on, this is a great project, but can we just ask you to consider these things?
Yeah, absolutely. I deal with that through my role as a town architect, but also in the practice I run. We're lucky enough to be delivering some social housing for the London Borough of Camden, where they are sort of directly delivering social rented homes. But regrettably, that's very much the kind of minority in terms of, it isn't the norm. And if we're going to hit 1.5 million homes, it probably needs to start becoming the norm. And how we square that circle in terms of funding or borrowing, capacity building, whatever it may be, is a really big challenge.
Are you optimistic then about the impact? Because the mayor is definitely putting some money behind that, but when you see the scale of the things to be done, they're modest sums. But do you feel that maybe you can't do everything, but you can kind of nudge the dial a little bit, send people off in a slightly different direction?
I mean, against my better judgment, yeah, I am optimistic, I guess. I think the one thing that makes me optimistic is we have a government in place that recognises how important house building or creating new homes in new places is, not only for our kind of national economic well-being, but also all the issues you mentioned with homelessness, temporary accommodation. I mean, there's an exhibit at the Building Centre at the moment which shows what the housing crisis looks like. Yes, in some instances it means rough sleeping, but more often it means, a family of 4 or 5 people living in a 17 square metre hotel room, for want of a better word, where you've got 2 children sharing a bed, another child, a baby in a cot with mould, damp, And I feel like we have a government that recognises how problematic that is. I guess how deplorable it really is for a country, of our size. I guess my optimism comes from the fact that it is going to take time. The housing market has really slowed down, and like a kind of oil tanker, you can't get up to speed overnight. It's going to take a lot of investment. I think there is a lot of learning to do. I think there are some realizations that need to happen. But given the fact that 1.5 million homes is one of the few tangible targets this government has put out there, something that the public in 5 years' time, I think, will hold them accountable for, I'd hope that we would see a sort of ramping up of investment as the years come.
My thanks there to Jazz Barler for joining me. Next up, we expand our scope to the city scale. The Czech practice Číbek and Christoph fulfills the role of city architect for Velesko Mazorízky, a small city in the east of the country. In their words, to maintain the health of the organism of a city and protect it from inappropriate and devastating interventions, the most qualified actor is the urban architect. Monocle's Tom Webb recently caught up with Andrei Číbek, co-founder of Číbek and Christoph, and Tom began by asking what their hopes were during their time as city architects.
To be a city architect is a great opportunity for a practicing studio, for a practicing architect to understand the logic of the city first, but also the logic of the municipality, how the municipality works, what are the aspirations, how they understand their built environment, how they challenge their city in terms of architecture and urban planning. So our aspiration was to understand and also to advise.
Well, let's get into being a municipal architect. What is the main advantages of it? Is it about coherence, having a wider view, treating the town as a whole organism? How do you see it?
We were appointed for 4 years. Our contract is limited. So first year of our activities in the city, we did a research. What is the city about? What are the strengths and what are the problems? And after doing this research, we just realized that it would be very helpful to find tools and to create the tools for the mayor and for the city hall to use the tools within our period of collaboration, but also maybe after we leave this position, they could use the tools forever.
Looking at this in a sort of wider role, the idea of a municipal architect, it feels like it's having a comeback. Should other cities be looking at adopting this?
I think so, because in Czech Republic, we have 600 cities and we have 151 architects, city architects working for the municipalities. It's not top down. It's not mandatory position given by the state. It's a mayor's aspiration to bring this role to their cities. So I think it's always about to have a great mayor with the will to create this position. And then architects could be very useful advisors for the mayors, because the mayors are not always architecturally or urban design educated. I think that we do understand the cities as an organism, and we are always very keen not just to design, but also to solve the problems, because this is what is actually the architect's role in this position.
Now, your studio has won multiple awards. Your work has been recognised internationally. Now, how easy is it to apply these global lessons to a local context?
I think it's very interesting to combine your global experience and trying to find the local character, to craft the character of each project uniquely. We believe not in style, we believe in crafting character. We think that as human beings, sometimes we have a style, but character is more important. So the same thing we are trying to understand in every single site and location we are working on. We have projects in 9 countries across Europe. And each context is very different. Each client is very different. Each typology is very different. And we are always trying to challenge these things. And we are always trying to understand what could be the suitable character for each project we are working on.
You mentioned character. Let's end on communication, because for your role to be effective, clear communication is key. But how easy is it for this? How easy is it to engage with other agencies and also the private sector?
The great thing to be in London is to be in touch with the best consultants and best partners in Europe, because we do consider London as the only global city in Europe. And it's really nice to be inspired and mentored by our partners here. We came from very little town in heart of Czechia, originally coming from Brno. It's a city of 400,000 inhabitants with a large architecture history. But to find inspiring consultants and partners, it's really hard there. So therefore, we chosen to come to London to find the right people to work with, to work together, to create the partnerships, and to be able to deliver the best possible contemporary and maybe also generational reflected designs, because I still consider myself as millennial. I know what my generation is, but I also know what I like and what I dislike, what is the world that we do understand we are living in. And this is something what we are trying also to offer to our clients or to our projects to focus on.
Andrzej Cibik there, speaking with Tom Webb. Lastly today, we expand our view further to the role of the national architect. Linda Thiel is the director of White Architecture's London studio. Her practice was tasked with advising the Swedish government at a national level in order to reduce red tape whilst maintaining design quality. But how does architectural identity come into play when advising an entire country? Linda recently joined Monocle's David Stevens to discuss White Architecture's work. And David began by asking what exactly the role of a national architect entails.
In Sweden, this was set up during 2017, 2018. We've had a national architect before, and it was decided in the government quite sort of broadly majority to reinstate this position. And the national architect sits within the Swedish National Board of Housing, Building and Planning. And the main role is to actually lead and coordinate the work within the designed living environment as a whole on a national level, which means both internally within various government departments and pushing forward various regulations and such, but also supporting all the city architects and municipal architects across Sweden, in terms of policy and general support. And one of the other tasks is also to generally raise awareness and a whole discourse about architecture and quality and designed habitats and the importance of that and how that has an impact on our lives, basically.
I'm sure this doesn't exist everywhere. So what is the alternative? If a country doesn't have this role, or even if there aren't these roles in cities, what are we missing? What do those countries miss out? What do you gain from having this sort of role in a country and in these cities?
I mean, one thing that I think we need to bear in mind, which was something that was also pointed out by Monica von Schmalensee, our former CEO, who was involved in the initiative of this, is that we have different governance models in different countries. So whether you have a planned city or a deal city or a negotiable city, kind of how you go about in agreeing on policies or aspects in the built environment. And I think Sweden is a very sort of planned, administrative and policy-making structure. And I guess regardless of which type of governance structure you have in your country, I think there's benefits to work broadly and holistically about how we meet all the challenges within our democracies and in terms of sustainability, infrastructure, how we manage growth, and not underestimating the aspect of the built environment's impact on that. And I think doing that on a national level enables local authorities or cities to benefit from the conversation and basically get the support. And also, in stating a role of a national architect also shows that the government actually wants to deliver on these aspects, giving that office an importance.
Do you think this also allows for architectural identity within a country?
You know, the question about national identity in architecture or built environment is really interesting. And I guess what you're asking is that the role of the national architect? I think I keep coming back to the structure of the country. I think so in Sweden, some of the city architects have very distinctive role in terms of architectural quality, or you might even say style or beauty, whereas our national architect has a much more holistic view on governance of these things and how do we actually make that come about in terms of whether it's industry, research or innovation or policy making. And I also know that, for instance, in Belgium, I think the national architect has a strong position in sort of announcing national architecture competitions and have a much more strong role in the actual design output of what is happening in Belgium. Whereas in Sweden, it's much more of a coordination and strategic role in how we reach our goals. In terms of the national architecture context, it's very different from country to country. And I think it's something that we probably have to have a conversation about, but it could also be a very sensitive conversation. I think one thing that was quite interesting when this office was set up in Sweden in 2018 was, I think there was like 3 main goals for the policy, and it was based on a new architecture policy that was agreed within the government. And it was about sustainability, equity, and reduced segregation. So I guess it was less about sort of style and beauty and more about societal aspects of built environment and architecture.
Where does the drive for these kind of roles come from? Does it come from top down, bottom up? And how does that kind of come about for a country that might not have that imposition?
It was a government decision to create this role and to strengthen this whole initiative. So now it's in the Department of Housing, Building and Planning. There was a conversation where it should be within another department that we have, which is like they manage all the state buildings in the country. But that was decided that's too much detailed in terms of buildings. But within the Housing, Building and Planning Department, there is both the Swedish Heritage Agency, the Design and Architecture Museum that manage all the archives in terms of architecture and design. And I think the initiative basically comes from within those organizations and departments. And then they've obviously been working hard to get this across to all political parties to get a broad majority. So I think part driven by some key people within the architecture industry, such as Monica, our former CEO, and Krista Larsson, who was very much involved at startup as well. But it is a government and political decision. It was good that it was broad and across all political parties. I think in the latest budget this year, they cut the grant for this initiative, which obviously being part of the architectural industry, I don't think it's great. I think this is a very important question to be able to raise awareness and coordinate all these things, given how much it affects our society and everybody.
It's clearly already facilitated a collaboration between public and private sector. I mean, you're a private studio. This is a public initiative. Do you think this sort of role and this sort of process and this sort of structure really helps that connection between private and public institutions? Do you find that there's more collaboration, more open doors, maybe because of where the impetus is coming from? Do you see that collaboration accelerate because of this sort of role?
I definitely think it does, especially through the specific initiatives about sustainable cities and the designed habitats is another policy, or designed living environments, because they need to reach across sectors and private and public to be able to materialize and actually come into fruition. I think one of the other main goals that I think is really important in Sweden, which has been heavily sort of in the built industry, all the Construction companies, they've been a very strong driving force, focused on just delivering and building, speaking less about quality, I would say, over the last 2 decades, 3 decades. Whereas with these initiatives, it's like raising an awareness about the importance of quality on our lives and cities and built environment. And actually, one part of the role is to also enable politicians and other government authorities to understand what this is and talk about it, and equally so across the industry. So it's bringing people together and be able to talk about these things. So it doesn't just be, we need to deliver X number of homes within X number of years as cheap as possible. I'm not saying that everyone wants to do that, but also actually talk about and raise awareness and be quite loud about the impacts of quality and the positive impact of the built environment has on society, health.
Yeah, I think that's really important, that quality and that stylistic advice is coming from one place. I wonder, just finally, if you have any examples, real-life examples of where you think this structure, this program, this way that Sweden does it has really succeeded. Can you point to anything specific in the built environment that you think really was a success because of this program?
Having the focus on sustainable cities and this designed living environment or designed habitat policy has enabled the national architect and sort of the team around that to have a lot more conferences on this topic, bringing sort of private, public and the wider industry together. It's been a great forum for bringing forward good examples. On an annual basis, they bring forward good examples, how various either cities or municipalities or private developers work with these issues to be able to meet all the goals in terms of 2030 European Bauhaus and all sustainability goals, as well as quality. So I think it's been raising awareness about all these good things that actually do happen across the country that might not get as much notice otherwise. And I also think that they've been raising the connection between health and good design and sustainability aspects.
Linda Thiel there in a conversation with David Stevens. And that's all for this week's episode of The Urbanist. Remember, you can get new editions of the show every week. Just follow us through your favourite podcast provider. You can also subscribe to Monocle magazine for regular reports on all things design, architecture and urbanism. Just visit monocle.com. This episode of The Urbanist was produced by Carlotta Rebello and by David Stevens, who also edits the show. I'm Andrew Tuck. Goodbye, and thank you for listening, City Lovers.